They called her the Queen of Comedy, the woman who made America laugh when the world was falling apart. But behind that famous red hair and sparkling smile was a heart that cried in silence. This is the untold story of Lucille Ball, the woman who gave laughter to millions yet couldn't find it in her own life. The story of Lucille Ball doesn't begin with laughter. It begins with a small-town girl staring out the window of a cold house in Jamestown, New York, dreaming of something bigger than the world around her. Before the fame, before the cameras, before the laughter that would echo through millions of homes, there was a girl who learned to smile through her pain because life gave her no other choice. Lucille Desiree Ball was born on August 6, 1911 in Jamestown, a place that felt ordinary in every way. But Lucille was anything but ordinary. Her father, Henry, worked as a lineman for Bell Telephone, and her mother, Desiree, was a loving homemaker who filled the home with tenderness. But happiness doesn't last long when fate has other plans. When Lucille was just 3 years old, tragedy struck. Her father became ill with typhoid fever, a deadly disease that moved fast and offered no mercy. One moment he was smiling at her, the next he was gone. The sound of his voice, the warmth of his arms, the stability of family, all ripped away in a matter of days. It was Lucille's first heartbreak, the first time she learned how quickly joy could turn to grief. She would later say that she could remember every moment of that day. The way the sky looked, the confusion of seeing grown-ups cry, the way a bird got trapped inside the house that same morning, and how from then on she believed birds inside meant death. That superstition stayed with her for life. After Henry's death, Lucille's mother, Desiree, was left with nothing but her 2 small children and a mountain of grief. She couldn't afford to raise them on her own, so she moved in with her parents. But the household was crowded and strict. Lucille's grandfather, Fred Hunt, was a man of discipline, strong, serious, and protective. He adored his granddaughter, but believed in rules over affection. Still, Lucille had something that couldn't be contained, an imagination. Even as a child, she was dramatic, playful, always putting on little performances for anyone who would watch. When she wasn't pretending to be a movie star, she was pretending to be a queen, a teacher, a dancer, or sometimes just someone whose life didn't hurt so much. But childhood wouldn't be easy. The family's financial struggles ran deep. Her mother had to work long hours in a factory far away, which meant Lucille spent most of her early years being passed between relatives. There were moments when she felt unwanted, like a visitor in her own life. When Lucille was 14, something tragic happened that would scar her forever. Her grandfather, who had been her protector, bought her brother a gun for target practice. One afternoon, an accident occurred. The gun went off, and a neighborhood boy was badly injured. Though Lucille wasn't directly responsible, the entire family was blamed. Her grandfather was sued and they lost nearly everything. Their home, their savings, their dignity, all gone. That incident changed Lucille. It taught her that the world could turn cruel in an instant, that people could point fingers at you even when your heart was innocent. It made her tougher, and it made her dream harder. Because when you lose everything once, you either give up or you fight like hell never to lose again. And Lucille Ball was a fighter. When she turned 15, she left Jamestown and moved to New York City with nothing but a suitcase and a dream, to become an actress. She enrolled in a drama school, the John Murray Anderson School for the Dramatic Arts, the same school that trained stars like Bette Davis. But the magic she expected wasn't there. Her teachers told her she didn't have it. They said she wasn't talented enough, that her voice was too low, her look too plain, her presence too forgettable. One even told her directly, "You'll never make it in show business." Lucille could have gone home right then. Most girls would have. But she didn't. She took a different kind of lesson from those words. She learned that rejection doesn't define you. Persistence does. She began working as a model, posing for fashion ads and cigarette campaigns under the name Diane Belmont. It sounded glamorous, elegant, like the kind of woman Lucille wanted to become. She was tall, beautiful, and striking, but she stood out most for her humor. Even in modeling shoots, she'd crack jokes, make faces, trip dramatically, turning mistakes into comedy before anyone realized they were laughing. It was her first glimpse of the power she had. She could make people laugh. Her modeling career brought her small opportunities in Hollywood, and soon she began landing bit parts in films. But Hollywood wasn't kind to women trying to break in, especially not to those who didn't fit the mold of perfect glamour. Lucille spent years being typecast as the pretty girl, the chorus girl, or the secretary. She appeared in dozens of films throughout the 1930s, but most audiences wouldn't remember her name. She was just another face in the background. Behind the bright smile and red lipstick was a woman who went home to an empty apartment every night, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. She struggled, not just financially but emotionally. Hollywood was filled with promises that evaporated by morning, and though she had charm and drive, she lacked the connections that often decided who rose and who vanished. Still, she refused to quit. She worked harder, stayed longer, and smiled wider. Directors noticed. Bit parts turned into supporting roles. And in 1938, she landed her first real break. A film called Stage Door alongside Katharine Hepburn and Ginger Rogers. She didn't have the biggest role, but she made an impression. Her wit, timing, and charisma started to shine through the cracks. The studio executives began to notice something rare. A woman who wasn't afraid to look ridiculous for the sake of a laugh. Then, in 1940, fate intervened with a love story that would change her life forever. Lucille was cast in Too Many Girls, a musical comedy. On the set, she met a handsome Cuban bandleader named Desi Arnaz. He was fiery, confident, and charming in a way that disarmed everyone around him, especially Lucille. Their chemistry was instant. They were complete opposites. She was disciplined, practical, older by 6 years. He was wild, spontaneous, and passionate. But the connection was undeniable. They fell in love fast, dangerously fast. Within 6 months of meeting, they eloped. No grand wedding, no planning, just two people running headfirst into love. Lucille believed she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all her life: stability, affection, belonging. But what she didn't know was that this same love would one day be the source of her deepest heartbreak. For now, though, she was glowing. Hollywood loved the idea of Lucy and Desi, the perfect couple, the beautiful American actress and the exotic Cuban musician. But behind the glamour, cracks began to show early. Desi's music career kept him constantly on the road. His charm, the same quality that drew her in, also drew attention from other women. Rumors of infidelity followed him everywhere. Lucille, desperate to keep the marriage alive, clung tighter. She started taking on more work, both to distract herself and to build a future that would keep them together. By the late 1940s, her film career had stalled again. She was in her late 30s, considered old by Hollywood's harsh standards. Studios wanted younger faces, and the roles dried up. But sometimes when one door closes, another, much bigger, opens. In 1948, Lucille was offered a role in a CBS radio show called My Favorite Husband. It was a light-hearted comedy about a zany wife and her long-suffering husband. Lucille's natural comedic instincts took over, and audiences loved her. Her timing, her expressions, her voice, everything clicked. For the first time, she wasn't the background character. She was the heart of the show. And she realized something profound. This laughter, this joy, this connection with millions of ordinary people was what she was meant to do. So when CBS decided to turn My Favorite Husband into a television series, Lucille was their first choice to star. But she had one condition. She wanted Desi Arnaz to play her husband on screen. At first, the network refused. They said audiences wouldn't accept an all-American redhead married to a Cuban man, but Lucille stood her ground. She wasn't just fighting for a role, she was fighting for her marriage. So, she and Desi took matters into their own hands. They created a live touring act, a vaudeville-style comedy show that they performed across the country. The crowds loved them. Their chemistry was electric, their timing flawless, their love, even with its flaws, was real. CBS couldn't ignore the success. Finally, they gave in. In 1951, I Love Lucy was born, and television would never be the same again. The show was revolutionary. It wasn't just funny, it was different. At a time when TV comedy was stiff and scripted, I Love Lucy felt alive. Lucille brought her physical comedy, her expressive face, her perfect timing. And Desi brought his charm, energy, and innovation. They became America's favorite couple, even though behind the scenes they were anything but perfect. The show broke barriers. It was the first to be filmed in front of a live studio audience, the first to be shot on 35mm film, preserving it for generations, and the first to feature an interracial couple as leads. Audiences adored Lucy Ricardo, the mischievous, lovable housewife whose schemes always led to chaos. Whether it was stomping grapes in Italy, wrapping chocolates in a factory, or trying to get into Ricky's show, Lucille Ball made people laugh harder than they ever had before. For 6 years, I Love Lucy dominated American television. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a cultural phenomenon. The night Lucy gave birth on the show, 44 million Americans tuned in, more than watched the president's speech that same evening. Lucille Ball wasn't just a star, she was America's sweetheart. But behind the laughter, she was breaking. Because while millions of people saw a woman who had it all, fame, beauty, love, only Lucille knew how lonely she truly was. Desi's drinking and infidelity grew worse. Their arguments became explosive. And while they smiled on screen, their home life was falling apart. Every night after filming, Lucille would go home to silence, to a husband who was there in body but distant in soul. And the woman who made the world laugh cried alone. The year was 1951, and Lucille Ball had just become the most famous woman in America. Every Monday night, the country stopped what it was doing to watch I Love Lucy. Families gathered around black and white screens, laughter echoing through living rooms as Lucy Ricardo's next crazy scheme unfolded. But while the audience was laughing, Lucille's heart was quietly breaking. Success came at a cost. She had everything she thought she'd ever wanted: fame, money, a husband by her side, and 2 beautiful children, Lucy and Desi Jr. But behind the cameras, life was far from the picture-perfect comedy the world adored. At first, fame had brought Lucille and Desi even closer. They had built Desi Productions together, a dream company born from their love, their ambition, and their shared desire to control their own destiny in Hollywood. Lucille wasn't just a star, she was a pioneer. Desi Productions was groundbreaking. They financed I Love Lucy themselves, using Desi's vision for a multi-camera filming setup that changed television forever. For the first time, sitcoms could be shot like movies, preserving the magic of live performance while ensuring quality. That technical innovation became the industry standard for decades to come. Lucille was also one of the first women to have real power in Hollywood, not just as an actress, but as a businesswoman. Every creative decision went through her. She knew her character better than anyone else, what Lucy would say, how she would move, when she would cry, when she would explode into laughter. But behind that control was desperation, the kind of determination that comes from fear. Fear of losing everything, fear of losing Desi. Because as much as I Love Lucy was about laughter, Lucille's life behind the scenes was filled with tears. Desi Arnaz was charming, the kind of man who could win anyone over with a smile. But that charm came with shadows. He loved Lucille deeply, but he also loved attention, parties, and temptation. His fame as a band leader meant constant touring, and with it came constant rumors. Lucille heard the whispers, stories of Desi being seen with other women, nights spent in bars until dawn, hotel phone calls that went unanswered. She wanted to believe it wasn't true. She wanted to believe that the man who made her laugh was still hers, but deep down she knew. There were nights when Lucille would wait up, pacing the floor of their Beverly Hills home. The same woman who made the world laugh was sitting in silence, staring at the clock, trying not to cry. And when Desi finally stumbled in, the smell of alcohol on his breath, his excuses rehearsed, Lucille didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She smiled, because she knew that tomorrow they had to face the cameras again. They had to be America's favorite couple. The irony was cruel. The world adored Lucy and Ricky Ricardo, the couple that laughed, fought, and made up at the end of every episode. Viewers believed that what they saw on screen was real, that their love was perfect. In truth, it was a performance that often mirrored their pain. Every "I love you, Ricky," and every "Lucy, you got some splaining to do" came with layers of real emotion. Affection mixed with sorrow, laughter laced with longing. For Lucille, comedy became her armor. Every gag, every pratfall, every laugh from the audience was a way to drown out the sound of her heart breaking. She once said, "I'm not funny, what I am is brave." And she was right. It takes courage to make others laugh when you feel like crying inside. As the 1950s went on, I Love Lucy continued to dominate television. The show won Emmy after Emmy. Lucille became the face of American comedy, the woman who brought joy to millions. But the bigger the spotlight grew, the darker her shadows became. Desi's drinking worsened. His infidelities became harder to hide. And Lucille, who had spent her whole life trying to hold her world together, began to crumble. Yet she never let the audience see it. There's a story from the set of I Love Lucy that captures who she was. One day, right before filming a major episode, Lucille received devastating news. Her marriage was in trouble again. She cried silently in her dressing room for an hour. Then she wiped her tears, fixed her makeup, and walked onto the stage. The moment the cameras rolled, she transformed. The crowd laughed, cheered, adored her. And when it was over, she walked off stage and cried again. No one ever saw both Lucilles at once. In 1957, after 6 seasons, I Love Lucy ended at the height of its popularity. Lucille and Desi replaced it with the Lucy-Desi Comedy Hour, hoping that maybe, by working less, they could save their marriage. But fame is a jealous lover. It never lets go easily. Their company, Desilu, was growing rapidly, producing shows like The Untouchables and Mission Impossible. The success was thrilling, but it also created pressure. The couple's personal life was collapsing under the weight of professional success. Lucille became more of a leader at Desilu, taking charge of finances, production schedules, and creative direction. Desi, meanwhile, was restless. He had built something extraordinary, but he wasn't the kind of man built for routine. He wanted to live fast. Lucille wanted stability. The tension was unbearable. In 1960, after 20 years of love, pain, and shared dreams, Lucille Ball filed for divorce. The day she signed the papers, she didn't smile for the cameras. There was no audience applause, no laugh track, no reconciliation scene. It was quiet, final, heartbreaking. Lucille had once said that Desi was the only man she ever truly loved, and even after their divorce, she meant it. They remained friends, business partners for a while, and co-parents. But the magic was gone. For a woman who had spent her life making others happy, she suddenly realized she didn't know how to make herself happy anymore. But Lucille Ball wasn't done. Heartbroken or not, she was still one of the sharpest minds in the industry. When Desi decided to step away from Desilu, Lucille made a bold move. She bought out his shares. And just like that, Lucille Ball became the first woman in history to run a major Hollywood studio. It was 1962, and she stood at the top, not just as an actress, but as a business titan. Under her leadership, Desilu thrived even more. She greenlit shows that would become television landmarks, Star Trek and Mission Impossible. She believed in talent, innovation, and risk, the very traits that defined her own life. Yet even surrounded by success, she was lonely. The laughter that once filled her life had become echoes. The house was quiet. The cameras were gone. For the first time, Lucille Ball, the queen of comedy, didn't know who she was without the applause. Then, unexpectedly, love found her again. In 1961, she met Gary Morton, a stand-up comedian. He was gentle, grounded, and nothing like Desi. Where Desi had been fiery and unpredictable, Gary was calm and loyal. He adored her, not as the glamorous Lucille Ball, but as the woman behind the legend. They married later that year, and for the first time in decades, Lucille found peace. Not fireworks, but comfort. Gary wasn't threatened by her fame. He didn't compete with her. He simply loved her, and that, for Lucille, was revolutionary. Still, she couldn't stay away from the screen for long. In 1962, she returned to television with The Lucy Show, and later Here's Lucy. Both were hits, but none captured the same magic as I Love Lucy. Audiences loved her, but the world was changing. The 1960s and 70s brought a new era, new stars, new humor, new tastes. Lucille adapted, but a part of her longed for the days when comedy was simple, when laughter could heal everything. Her body began to slow down, but her spirit never did. She worked tirelessly, perhaps because she didn't know how to stop. People often asked why she never retired. Her answer was simple: I'd rather regret the things I've done than the things I haven't. Behind the success and the legacy, Lucille remained deeply human, flawed, vulnerable, and emotional. She loved deeply, hurt deeply, and lived deeply. She would often say that her life was a story of contradictions, a woman who made others laugh but often cried alone, a woman who loved fame but hated loneliness, a woman who broke barriers but never stopped breaking inside. By the 1970s, Lucille Ball had become an institution, the grand dame of comedy. Young performers worshipped her, the world adored her. Yet when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a legend. She saw the little girl from Jamestown who just wanted her father back, the teenager who wanted to be loved, the woman who wanted to believe in happy endings. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made her so relatable. Because behind the laughter, she was just like us. In her later years, Lucille remained fiercely independent. She gave interviews, accepted awards, and occasionally appeared on television specials. But every time someone mentioned I Love Lucy, her eyes softened, as if she were remembering not just the show, but the life she lived within it. She once said, I Love Lucy was never just a show. It was my heart, my soul, my marriage, my laughter, and my tears, all rolled into one. It wasn't just a program that changed television. It was the story of a woman who turned pain into art, and art into immortality. As the 1980s arrived, Lucille slowed down, but never stopped working. She appeared in interviews, award shows, and even took on one final project, Life with Lucy in 1986. It was meant to be her triumphant return, but the show was short-lived. Critics were harsh, calling it outdated. Audiences who once adored her now seemed to have moved on. It broke her heart, not because of the failure itself, but because she felt forgotten by the very world she helped create. But history would never forget Lucille Ball. By the mid-1980s, Lucille Ball had become more than a star. She was an American institution. Her face, her red hair, that unmistakable laugh, they were woven into the fabric of a nation's memory. Generations had grown up with I Love Lucy, and even decades later, reruns played every morning and every night, making her presence feel eternal. But time, like fame, is cruel in its honesty. Lucille was no longer the fiery redhead chasing wild dreams across a sitcom set. She was in her 70s now, slower, softer, and sometimes quietly haunted by the silence that fame leaves behind when the applause fades. She had lived several lifetimes, as a daughter, a dreamer, a wife, a mother, a comedian, and a trailblazer. But now she was living the one role that frightened her the most, being forgotten. In public, she was still Lucy. Fans approached her with love in their eyes, telling her how much her show meant to them, how she made their childhood brighter. She smiled, took photos, and thanked them graciously. But when she went home, the quiet of her house seemed deafening. Her second husband, Gary Morton, loved her dearly and gave her comfort, but Lucille's mind never stopped moving. She missed the energy of the studio, the laughter of the audience, the feeling of stepping into a world where everything, even her pain, could be rewritten with a punchline. I don't miss being famous, she once said softly in an interview. I miss the work. I miss hearing that laughter. To Lucille, laughter wasn't just entertainment. It was medicine. It was how she survived. And without it, life felt empty. After Life with Lucy ended abruptly in 1986, she took the failure hard. The show had been a chance to reconnect with audiences, to feel alive again in front of the camera. But television had changed. Audiences wanted new faces, faster jokes, different stories. For the first time in her life, the queen of comedy was told she was no longer funny. Critics were unkind, saying she was too old for television. That phrase, too old, echoed in her mind for years. This was a woman who had once ruled Hollywood, who had pioneered the sitcom format, who had broken every glass ceiling in front of her, and now she was being told that time had taken her crown. She tried to laugh it off, but inside, it stung deeply. Because Lucille Ball wasn't just an actress, she was comedy, and when comedy moved on without her, she felt like she'd lost a part of herself. Still, the world hadn't forgotten her. Far from it. In 1984, she received the Kennedy Center Honor, one of America's highest awards for lifetime achievement in the arts. When she walked on stage to receive it, the audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted minutes. She smiled, waved, and fought back tears. Because in that moment she realized she hadn't been forgotten. She had become part of history. Lucille spent her later years surrounded by family, close friends, and a small circle of loyal fans. Her daughter, Lucille Arnaz, became a talented actress and singer in her own right. Her son, Desi Arnaz Jr., also pursued acting and music. She was proud of them, fiercely so. But like any mother, she carried guilt. The years she'd spent chasing perfection, balancing fame and motherhood, haunted her. She often wondered if she'd been there enough, if she'd given enough. Lucy once said in an interview, "My mother didn't just work. She lived work. But she loved us, even when she didn't know how to show it." Lucille tried to make up for lost time in her later years, phone calls, family dinners, small gestures of affection. She wasn't perfect, but she was present, and that mattered more than anything. Even after decades in Hollywood, Lucille remained surprisingly humble. She didn't see herself as a legend. To her, she was still the girl from Jamestown who had once been told she'd never make it. But that girl had defied every expectation. She had made millions laugh. She had built an empire. She had created the blueprint for modern television. And yet, she often said, "All I ever wanted was to make people happy. If I did that, then I did my job." As the 1980s came to a close, her health began to decline. Years of relentless work, stress, and cigarettes had taken their toll. But she never wanted pity. She faced aging with humor, often making jokes about it during interviews. In 1989, she appeared at the Academy Awards, her last major public appearance, alongside Bob Hope. The crowd erupted in applause, cheering for the comedy legend who had defined a generation. Lucille smiled, but those close to her said she was deeply moved by the reception. She later confessed that the ovation made her cry when she got home, because for a moment she felt the love that she had spent her whole life chasing. A few weeks later, tragedy struck. On April 18, 1989, Lucille underwent emergency heart surgery after suffering a ruptured aorta. The surgery appeared successful at first. She even spoke to nurses afterward, joking lightly, ever the performer. But just 8 days later, on April 26, 1989, Lucille Ball passed away quietly at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. She was 77 years old. News of her death spread across the world within hours. Television networks broke regular programming to air tributes. Newspapers from New York to London carried her photo on the front page, that radiant smile frozen in time. Fans wept. The entertainment industry mourned. Even those who hadn't grown up watching her felt the loss, because Lucille Ball wasn't just an actress. She was the sound of laughter itself. When Desi Arnaz heard the news, he was heartbroken. Though they had divorced nearly 3 decades earlier, he never stopped loving her. The last words he ever said to her, just before her surgery, were simple and pure. He told her, "I love you, honey. Good luck." And when he later spoke about her, he said, "I love Lucy was never just a title, it was true." Desi himself passed away later that same year, as if the universe couldn't bear to keep them apart for long. In the end, their love story, messy, beautiful, and eternal, outlived everything else. After her death, tributes poured in from around the world. Fellow comedians called her the godmother of television. Carol Burnett, One of her close friends and protégés said, "Lucy paved the way for every woman who ever wanted to be funny on her own terms." Even decades later, her influence could be seen everywhere, from sitcoms like Friends and Seinfeld to modern-day performers who studied her timing, her courage, her fearlessness. Because Lucille Ball didn't just make people laugh, she made them believe that laughter could conquer anything. Today, more than half a century after I Love Lucy first aired, reruns still make audiences laugh out loud. Kids who weren't even born when she died still giggle at her antics. The chocolate factory scene, the grape-stomping chaos, the unforgettable moments that never age. In Jamestown, New York, her hometown, a museum stands in her honor. Thousands visit each year, walking through rooms filled with her costumes, scripts, and memories. Her spirit lives there, not in sadness, but in joy. Because for Lucille Ball, laughter was her greatest gift to the world, and the world has never stopped receiving it. But perhaps the most touching legacy of all isn't in her awards, her shows, or her fame. It's in what she taught us about strength, resilience, and the beauty of imperfection. Lucille Ball showed the world that comedy isn't about being perfect. It's about being human, about tripping, falling, crying, and still finding the courage to smile. She taught us that pain doesn't have to destroy you. It can shape you, mold you, even make you laugh again. And she proved that even the loneliest hearts can create joy that lasts forever. In her quiet moments, Lucille used to say she wanted to be remembered simply, not as a legend, but as someone who gave happiness. She once told a close friend, "If people still laugh when they hear my name, then I've done all I needed to do." And indeed, they do. Every time her voice echoes through a living room, every time someone watches her trip over herself for the 100th time and still laughs like it's the first, Lucille Ball lives again. Not as the woman who cried alone, but as the woman who taught the world to laugh through its tears. So tonight, if you happen to turn on your television and stumble upon a black and white episode of I Love Lucy, stop for a moment. Watch her. Really watch her. See the way she moves, how every expression, every pause, every gesture is a symphony of timing and heart. Behind that laughter was a lifetime of pain, but also a lifetime of courage. Lucille Ball wasn't just the queen of comedy. She was proof that laughter can heal even the deepest wounds. As the credits of her life rolled, the laughter never stopped. And somewhere, perhaps, beyond the stage lights and the pain she left behind, you can still hear her, that infectious, unforgettable laugh echoing through time. The world loved Lucy, and Lucy, in her own quiet way, loved the world right back.